Well, welcome to our next installment of our small group study. We're going to be talking about, in the book of Exodus, the formation of the tabernacle. And so we're going to be in Exodus chapter 25, verses 1 through 9. Chad, would you like to go ahead and read for us?
Sure. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel, that they take for me a contribution. From every man whose heart moves him, you shall receive the contribution for me. And this is the contribution that you shall receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue and purple and scarlet yarns, and fine twined linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, goat skins, acacia wood, oil for the lamps, spices for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones and stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst. Exactly as I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle and of all its furniture, so you shall make it."
All right, so one of the things that probably would immediately strike us, upon reading this for the very first time, not having any experiences as Christians, believers, whatever, it might strike someone as being strange that God needs a special tent to live in, and that, not only does he need a special tent to live in, but it needs to be fancy. And so when we look at that, I would say that a fairly significant number of non-Christians, there's already an element of suspicion around churches, religion, and finances. And then you read something like this, and those alarm bells start to go off. So how are we to understand this need that God has for a tent, and a special one at that?
Well, God is setting the stage for our interfacing with Him, and this meeting place is symbolic of the larger reality, the spiritual reality. As far as from the financial aspect, God doesn't need our money, so why these things? But these things, I think, have a spiritual reality to them, and the value is represented in that, I suppose.
Okay.
I think also in Hebrews, we're told that, the pattern is supposed to be a copy of the heavenlies, of heaven. Mm-hmm. And heaven is fancy.
Okay.
Streets of gold, pearly gates, and things of this sort. And why did it have to be a copy of heaven might be another question and stuff like that. But if it's supposed to have some resemblance to heaven, I don't know how you get around that.
Well, I think that, what we're kind of all getting to is the idea that the tabernacle is representing a spiritual truth, and you talked about it representing the heavenlies, and in representing the heavenlies, it's not that we should suppose that things in heaven are made out of bronze and gold and those kinds of things. It's possible that they could be, but it's also possible that that's more symbolic. The point is that God is glorious, right? And that these things are the earthly representations of glory. And so why does God want the Israelites to bring these things, these materials, these building blocks? Why does he need these particular ones? Well, because they're going to build a representation of the dwelling place of God, and it's got to be glorious, because that's what happens when God dwells someplace. He makes it glorious. And glory has certain meanings to it. It has to do with weight, something that's taken seriously. It has to do with value. It has to do with light and being bright, having shininess to it. But all those things are kind of wrapped up in these earthly materials, which is why they're the representations of glory. Gold is heavy. Gold shines. Silver shines. Bronze shines. And importantly, that these things have value to them. It's costly for us. It's a sacrifice for us to bring these things, and that's a really important aspect of why why it's requiring, it's a really important aspect of why God wants these specific materials to be brought to him in order to do this. Ultimately, if the tabernacle represents us, it has to do with the necessity of our being glorious and the sacrifice that's required in doing that. So we can probably think about that aspect of it for just a second. Glory and sacrifice, what's the connection there? Now clearly there is in the materials being used. They're going to have to sacrifice because gold is valuable and these things are valuable, and they're going to have to give up something of value to God. But why? Obviously, God's not saying that glory equals gold and gold is expensive and I only want expensive things. There's something more going on there. So what do we take from this idea of needing, of God's glory requiring some kind of sacrifice on our part?
Well, I think we, excuse me, we hinted at this a while back in one of our earlier lessons, and we talked about how the worthiness, the worth, the value of God is recognized in the sacrifice, and the greater the sacrifice, the greater the worth you're ascribing to Him, and it's one of those things that God's glory is independent of our recognition of it. Mm-hmm. However, for it to be a reality to us, it's hard for that to be the case without us giving a commensurate sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. So you can think about anything that we currently ascribe glory to, as an example. So in our culture, boys will generally grow up wanting to be either some kind of like a video game player, professional, right? Or athlete of some kind. And you can kind of group those two things together. One's only using your thumbs, but man, those thumbs are dynamite, right?
A virtual athlete?
Right.
Goody.
There's a whole world of esports.
Yes,
you don't know about.
Yeah, exactly. And some of those guys make
pretty
tons
serious
of money.
money.
But whether it's esports or actual sports, the point of that is it just something that you pick up and do? Because when I was a kid, that's kind of that was my view of how things work. Because we talk about this thing called talent, right? And well, that guy's got talent. And my idea was, well, you just got to find the thing that you just pick up and are great at, right? Did you guys ever think about that? There's something out there that if you just start doing it and you're just automatically amazing at it. And it wasn't until I started getting older that I realized that that's not the way that it works at all. That there's a significant amount of sacrifice involved. Whether you want to look at Michael Jordan, everybody looks at Michael Jordan and sees, oh, he's a natural athlete. But if you ever hear people talk about his work ethic, all that guy did was, for years and years and years, was play basketball, practice basketball. That's all that he did. If you want to look at, somebody who goes to the Olympics and they're a swimmer, they're a gymnast, whatever, you're talking years of sacrifice on their part and their family's part in order to do that. Just decades often of doing nothing but that thing over and over and over again and giving up everything else really in order to accomplish that. You can also look at stuff like, being a great singer or, playing an instrument really well. You're going to, whatever the case, you can think about giving up just decades of your life in order to get to the point where you're actually going to reap the reward from that. Now, I'm not saying there are no exceptions to that, but the interesting thing is the exceptions to that are a strange thing because, you can think about like Aaron Carter or something like that. So he was one of those kids that his brother was a singer in a boy band, and he then got a record contract at like 14 or something, ridiculous age like that, and just had all these big hits because they were the record industry was, putting its best people on every aspect of his career, and so he became really well known. But if you look at his life now, it's kind of a disaster. So what are we to make of that connection then about this need of? It seems like in order to experience any kind of real glory, you're going to have to sacrifice for it. Why would that be the case? It seems like for us, when you're a kid, that's not the way that you want the world to work.
There's a proverb that talks about an inheritance being gained overnight versus the slow growth of that thing, and one is good and the other isn't. And I think of the example of Carter here, that having so much so fast is often destructive, and our ability to mature and grow and become what we need to be rarely is good if it's fast. We don't become the thing we need to be quickly. I think we have to slowly become changed to the right thing. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
No, I think it does.
I think there's also there's something about the cost of something, and I think you used the example of if you had a Ferrari, you'd be parking at the back of a parking lot and taking every effort, and but the 16-year-old kid whose parents are insanely wealthy, who give him a Ferrari, he's going to have much less care for that Ferrari because it's just worth much less in his eyes because it didn't really cost him anything.
Yeah, there seems to be this connection that when we get something of value too easily or too cheaply, that we don't. It's the idea of the biblical idea of knowing. Knowing isn't head knowledge; it's experiential, and so you can look at a Ferrari and say, "I know that has value." But as a 16-year-old, you can say, "I know that has value," but that's a far different thing than a 40-year-old or 50-year-old who's worked his entire career and really sacrificed to master some aspect of the world, and finally, after years and years and years of dedicating himself to that, has now mastered some part of the world to the point where he's paid highly enough for that he can now go out and buy one of those things. That car is a completely different thing than it is to that teenager, even though both of them will say, I know a Ferrari has value. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure, of course.
Like there seems to be something that is inescapable about the need for us to actually know, in the biblical sense, to experience the cost of something before we really know the cost of something, before we can appreciate it. And one of the things that seems to be the case is that when we receive things of value without actually having known the value of those things experientially, that they're not blessings to us, that they actually become something that's detrimental to us. That when we take things of value too lightly, there seems to be this way that God has created the world, that certain things, because of who He is and because that He's the one who created the world, that certain things have value, certain things have weight and they have glory. And you take them lightly at your peril. And in fact, the way to live a good life, the way to live a blessed life is to take things of weight seriously